welcome back to the Company Road podcast. And I hope you're all well as we push closer to Australian winter and European summer and all those things. And yeah, last month our theme was all about growth within organizations and how to set up foundations for growth and enabling teams and building a growth mindset. And this month we're pushing into the theme of innovation and trends and things that will drive growth for organizations and intrapreneurs as leaders on a more personal level. So we're going to be asking, what's next for organizations that have scaled and intrapreneurs as leaders on a more personal level. So we're going to be asking, what's next for organizations that have scaled? What are the latest trends? How can you, as a leader, play a role most effectively in all of that? And how do businesses need to adapt in some ways? So my next guest is no stranger to growth, adaptation in the market, and he's helped steer businesses to huge success despite unpredictable things happening along the way and market changes and all the things that go with it. So we're going to get into that, but I'm really delighted to introduce my next high profile guest of the show. I'm super excited he's able to join. Chris Mitchell, welcome to the show.
Hello, Chris. Good to see you.
Yeah. Chris, you're the CFO of Canstar, Australia's biggest financial comparison site. And you've been with Canstar since about 2007, so a little while. And it's going to be cool just talking about the story of that. And you've co-piloted a transformation from pretty much a small B2B research business into a huge digital marketplace. And it's just such an awesome story as one of Australia's biggest financial comparison sites and institutions here. And you've obviously brought in a number of different brands, like 300 brands in terms of banking, insurance, and superannuation, and bringing that comparison opportunity together. So you've been working with the team for a little while. You've turned it into a household brand. Over 10 million Australians use it every year. And it's just really cool. Last month, as I said, we were talking about growth, but maybe we start with that just to begin with. Let's hear about your growth story. Talk about Canstar, maybe a bit about yourself and what's happened for you over that time as well. But what's been your experience?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here. Full disclosure, we worked together 20 years ago. Well, 20 years ago. But look, and I'll be upfront with your audience. I'm a country boy from North Queensland originally, so unfortunately we'll come across sounding a bit rough around the edges from time to time. But started my career in audit in North Queensland. Why, I think the thing about audit, which is interesting from a growth perspective, is that you get to see lots of different businesses. And so I really enjoyed that aspect of actually just seeing different businesses and how they worked. And from a growth perspective, it was pretty funny being a young fella at the time. Every time you do an audit, you have to write they call it these days an audit findings report. And it's a letter to help management to improve. And as a young person, you take that, you're very passionate about trying to help people improve and change. And what you realize as many years later is that they don't want that help. Everyone's busy and they're trying to get their processes going. But yeah, I found audit at the start a long time ago, just very seeing different businesses. And I've always been a bit of a student of business. So anyway, so I started my career in Townsville in far north Queensland. Once I got chartered and had a few years under my belt, I moved to London at the back end of 2002. Early 2003, I started working at Proximity London, which is where we met back in the day. And the thing I loved about making that change and working in a business and not coming to audit it each year is you actually get to be part of something bigger and you get to see it through. The thing about an audit is you just touch on it once a year and you come in and try and see how it's going. But from being within a business, that was a lot of fun. And the Proximity London time, I just look on so fondly. It was a bit of a turnaround. So when I joined at the start of 2003, the business was coming off a bit. So it had been a merger of about 5 or 6 agencies. A lot of clients were jumping off, reduction in staff numbers, and we bottomed out sort of 2004, but then went on a bit of a tear across 2005 and 6 pre-GFC. I left there at the end of 2006, but across that sort of 4, 5, 6 years, it was just a lot of fun. I think that's one of the things. I just had a great time. I've never worked as hard. I've never worked harder in my entire life, I might add. We just worked all the time. But there was something about the work I found quite inspiring, and about that growth in the teams. Like, you just see creativity and innovation, and I found that really great. And then from there, went to Canada for a bit, Was financial controller for 2 5-star hotels and an Irish pub. We used to go snowboarding every day. It was fantastic. But I think what was interesting about that gig was bringing that sort of innovation and growth and then just applying, being prepared to try new things. So when I got there, we had to create a new incentive scheme for the executive team for the hotels. We were able to actually go through the balance sheet with a fine-tooth comb and unlock a bunch of money for the P&L for the guys. And we helped those execs through focusing on the right KPIs to drive the right outcomes for customers, the hotels, staff. And it was a cracker. That was a 7-month stint or whatever. The guy was in charge at the time. At the end of that season, paid for me to go heli skiing as a thank you. He goes, mate, this is amazing. It's just been great. So you go, you beauty, here we go. So after that, lobbed into Australia, and it was pretty funny. The Canstar interview was like, I turned up, I answered a job interview on Seek back in the time, and the CEO was in his first week. He'd taken over from the founder. The business was actually 15 years old at that point. Less than 30 people, pretty little research house. The Canstar brand didn't exist. It was called Canex back then. And I said to the new CEO in his first week, I said, oh, mate, what's this place like? And he goes, I don't know, mate, I just got here. But he pointed at me, he goes, I promise you this, son, this will be a 3 to 5 year gig. We'll build this up, sell it, and go do something else. And then the joke became years later that we're on our 4th or 5th term. We didn't know the 3 to 5 had been pushed out. But we had plenty of work still to do. And I think the business kept evolving and growing. And you've just been a really amazing journey. That's the story of you need resilience, you need a whole bunch of stuff. You've had time like COVID was a great year where you think you're on one track and then all of a sudden you're doing something very different for 6 months. But yeah, it's just been fantastic. And like when we started, the brand was known by less than 1 in 5 people knew about the brand. It's now 4 or 5 people know it from a prompted awareness perspective. Canstar Blue didn't even exist. Back, we launched that in 2010. That was being inspired by JD Power in the United States. It was the inspiration for that. And so Canstar has always been a business that has evolved and changed. And so when you think about growth mindsets and things that you've got to have an open mind. And I think in my case too, they talk about a glass half full or whatever. I reckon it's just got to have something in it. I'm good. It's just a couple of mouthfuls of that glass will be fine. And I think it's been really good. And the business, that evolution, like the very first part of the business was just collecting interest rate data on home loans and then collecting other product data on banking products. We still have that business now. I think on a home loan, we collect something like 200 data points. And that's in a system. It's sold as a subscription back to the banks. And as a product manager in a bank, you can log on to our system and see what you can see on the website, but on steroids. Yeah. That business we still have. The inspiration for the ratings was Morningstar. There were Morningstar ratings around. The guys had all this product and banking data. They thought, well, what can we do with that? And then one of the things I need to say is no one is to be rated. But if you win a Canstar 5-star award and you want to use the logo in your marketing, as a marketing manager within one of the banks or institutions, and there's like a license fee that you've got to enter into, but there's no obligation to use it. And then what's really driven the scale and growth over the last sort of 5-10 years has been the digital business though. And that's where, as a consumer, you can come to the business and compare products. So if you're using the home loans example, you can compare home loans. And if you click on a product and it takes you to that institution, there's like a referral fee there. It's a bit like Google, CPC, how that works. And there'll be different models at play there. So it's really about coming back to the digital marketplace on one side, trying to help consumers save time and money. And then on the other side, trying to match those consumers to the clients that want to give them the business and just do it digitally. And that's our mission that we're on, to help people and help clients too. So that's been the journey, and we're still doing that. There's probably a bit of the next evolution is to get away, not to get away, but like we probably have over 10 million Aussies a year come to our websites. But for us, it's knowing more about those Aussies. And Canstar now, you can get your free credit score. You can have an account. We've got an app. There's tips, prizes. We want to help people with that. So that's where we're going to next. And then the more data that people are willing to give us, because there's a value exchange there with the consumer and they're prepared to part with that, we can then use that to help with that matching process on the other side to get them to the right client that actually wants that business and wants to actually help do it digitally. So yeah, that's where it's at. And so for us, from a growth, everything's about, in this world now with AI and everything that's coming, it's about how do we automate, how do we leverage that to make everyone's jobs easier. I think we actually hit, from an innovation and growth perspective, we did an internal competition last week and we had a couple of prizes for the winners. Like, out of the day, we got Chief Data Officer at Canstar, Mitch Watson, been here like another 15 years or so. And Mitcho and his team ran that day, and I think we had at least 30 odd ideas. We had one particular person who came up with a crack. They won one of the awards, but they had the poor person. This is a problem for us to fix in their day-to-day job. For one piece of work, they had probably 50 to 100 spreadsheets they had to go through. And Mitch is hearing it his first time. He's going, oh my God. Just want to give that person a hug and a cup of tea. So we must fix that for you. So that's the mission we're getting around, is like, how do we automate, go faster? And it's not about saving money. It's actually going faster. It's like, how do we become more productive to further that advancement of the journey? So there you go, mate. So that was a big intro.
That's a great intro. What a wonderful story. There's so much in that we can think about, and just from the point of view of, by the sounds of it, you were there from quite early on in the piece, in that transition period between founder and then new CEO coming in. I want to just talk about that part, and also about when you went off to Whistler, when you went to Proximity. Just from your own personal point of view, how do you know whether the working environment is going to be right for you in one way or another?
That's a really good question. I think positivity is key, like in terms of, and you get a pretty good feel of that early doors. I think actually at the ad agency, the way I knew that was just walking into I remember it was a Thursday night, walking in. Back then there was a bar behind reception, Thursday night, full of people. Everyone's wearing jeans and whatever. I'm walking in a suit because that's what accountants used to do.
Yeah.
And I remember walking in and going, oh my God, how good is this place? And then you could have signed me up. Then I had to go up the lift. And Damien, who's a CFO, is in a suit. And he was very serious. But you just knew he was very serious about the work. But you could just tell from the vibe behind that reception area there that, yeah, this would be a fun place to work. And Andrew Spicer, who was the Canstar CEO at the time when we did the interview, he was just straight up. He goes, mate, I don't know what this place is like. I literally started on Monday. But the way he said it, he goes, we're not here to, again, it's about serious work. We're here to build this. We're here to build a great company, and I'm going to do something with it. And then if it works, we'll go and do something else. And you go, and in that particular interview too, there was one of the major shareholders in that meeting, and those guys had me at hello. I would have signed up right then and there. Obviously, I'd still go through a process.
Yeah.
And actually for Spicer, who was the CEO, many years later, go, yeah, the guys weren't a bit sure, because I knew after the first interview I was going to hire, and then the other guys were like, hang on, mate, he's your first interview. And he just said, oh, look, country boy, finished high school at Mount Isa. He said, that's where my wife went to high school, was Mount Isa. It was like, he'll be fine. He's worked in London. He'll work it out. So again, yeah, so I think positivity is critical. And I think because business, not everything goes right all the time, And so you need positive people around you, because when things are tough, if some people have a negative sort of viewpoint, it can be hard for them. And you need positive people, because they're going to bring everyone else up. And so I think one of the things for me particularly is positivity is key, because if you have positivity and an open mindset, you can achieve a lot of things.
Yeah. I want to say I probably haven't worked with as many accountants or finance people as you have, but I've worked with a few, and I don't know whether positivity and no can-do attitude, or I don't feel like those are words that usually spring to mind when you think about finance.
Yeah, well, it's hard there because they're kind of like the gatekeepers. It's a hard because they've got to reinforce the processes, the policy, the accounting policy, expense
Yeah,
policies and things like that.
yeah. I guess finance and
Yeah,
financial controllers and accountants and people in those positions, they can be seen as the enemy a little bit,
yeah,
a bit of a villain kind of character within the context of the organization. It's not everyone that can get the most out of finance teams and financial leaders, in my experience anyway. It feels like
yeah,
you've got to work with it, and you've got to basically, if you're in innovation, if you're in marketing, if you're in this or that, you've got to work within the constraints that are there, and then you gain the respect of the commercial leadership. You still need to, obviously, you still need to toe the line a bit. So I guess from your point of view, like, how do people get the best out of finance, do you think? And
yeah.
what have you seen work?
I think, yeah, I think you need, I think a good leadership will try and build a finance team that sees a finance team as a support vehicle of the business. So I've always had teams, been a part of teams where we're there to serve the business. In my role as CFO, I've always thought of myself like the CEO is my number one client. Obviously, very closely followed by the board and the shareholders or whatever. But
Mm.
and my role is to actually help how we're going to drive this business for growth and to make money and obviously be profitable along the way because you got to have enough money, you got to have cash in the tin. So, but I think I think it's actually more on. I think the starting point is more on the finance teams to actually have a crack and then build those relationships. Relationships are critical across the business, and so I'm a big believer with my teams is that I just want the guys to walk the floor, go and see someone. And nothing gets me crankier than having someone on my team give it. I don't like when someone on my team's cranky about someone not doing anything and they actually haven't spoken to them in person. Or it's harder with working from home if they haven't picked up the phone. And because everyone gets too many emails and all that sort of stuff. We've got Slack these days. There's multiple channels, but you just need people get so busy it's easy to hide behind email, Slack, text, whatever. Actually, not too many people are, but text. It's hard for someone to say, "Oh, look, I couldn't get back to you," if you've actually spoken to them, and so that relationships are really critical, and it's about trying to help each other. Yes, you've got reporting against KPIs, and you see delivery on that. I think part of that is actually you got to build trust amongst your teams, across your teams, to say, look, if the numbers aren't telling us the answer that you'd like, that's more about actually what problem do we need to fix? How do we help you even more? Do you know what I mean? And I think sometimes if you don't have the groundwork for those relationships, it's harder to build the environment of trust so that everyone's running in the same direction. And it should be that the numbers are the numbers. We want to focus. We've got to make sure we're focused on the right numbers. If these numbers aren't the right numbers, work with the business to tell us. You tell us what numbers should we be focusing on to get to that, and then you can, and then that comes back to drivers and what are we trying to achieve? What are we trying to push?
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a great answer. I think there's a lot of kind of cloudiness around numbers and metrics. Like it feels like there's indirectly or directly, it basically ties into people's own performance goals, and it can be bonuses, it can be this or it can be that, but essentially your career path and your promotions and other things, it might be tied to it. So it feels like it starts with the person that's going to take ownership in some way of the number. And then it's always got to ladder up to the organization wide and the business wide set of numbers in one way or another. But that whole kind of step is quite a big one, to get it all working and coordinated in a way that everyone's working on the stuff in the way that not only incentivizes them and they feel motivated by, but it then connects to the broader number and the broader ambition of the business. And that feels like the sweet spot. But
Chris, that's spot on.
How rare is that?
No, but that's spot on, mate. And so, the biggest issue you have with incentive schemes is if your KPIs aren't aligned to the strategy and the business and what you're trying to achieve, how can you expect your teams to roll the same direction? They're going to go off in all sorts of different tangents. And And that's where I think incentive schemes, the simpler they are, the better. And in terms of trying to measure performance, that's hard. We spent a lot of time over the years on goal sheets, fine tuning, and but everyone still hates the process. And so it's still, you got to find a way as you get bigger that the process doesn't get too bureaucratized in terms of bureaucracy and things like that. So I think there's so much that if you agree a strategy, try and keep it as simple as you can, trying to get the right KPIs that everyone can push towards, and then you got to find, okay, so how does that individual in that team that's over there play their role to impact that, and then you got to help join that, and then that's in terms of everyone working together to do that.
Yeah, there could be a new joiner, right? It's always like the whole thing is in transition the whole time, right?
Yeah.
Somebody joins, new team leader, they get set some goals. All of that has to be considered in light of what's happened before and what the other 6 team leaders have had.
Yeah.
But because he's joining, or maybe 3 of them are joining, you've got to rethink the whole lot. And then it's always evolving like that. And if you get it wrong, obviously it's incentivized, like you say, it's incentivizing the wrong behavior. So from a personal point of view, would you give any advice? Do you have any advice for anyone out there that is basically trying to align themselves to the business goal in one way or another? What do you think works well and gets through easy?
I think it depends. Say if it's a project, or you're in a product and design, or you're trying to build a new product for the business, I think what's critical is trying to get everyone to take a step back. What are we trying to achieve? And what's the one critical metric that we think that this new product, because obviously there's going to be a lot of uncertainty, but if we've got 8 months to go in a year or 10 months to go in a year, like what's the one thing we can get, or 2 if you're lucky? And then it's about having consistency so that everyone's targeted on it in some way, shape or form, so that it should cascade down, so that the person, no one in my team shouldn't have a goal that I'm not on the hook for. Do you know what I mean? Almost, in terms of, now obviously lower levels, they all should cascade in. So I think, to use an example, we put in a new accounting system, everyone had the same goal. We just got to launch that thing on 1 August. If we do, that's a 5 out of 5. You know? And then so we get it out a month later, okay, that's still good, that's a 4 out of 5. But we've got to have it done by the end of financial year. So you kind of, so I think, it's just trying to have consistency across targets, incentives for people, because when you don't, because they all talk, everyone talks anyway, and so you'll get people that won't be happy. If there's inconsistency, it just makes it quite difficult, and you just spend your time having more meetings trying to sort it out. So,
but you must have had a load of chats along the way that, where people like leaders are like really putting their strategies forward, and like they've spent weeks and weeks doing this stuff. They come and they present it all, and you think, how can that be, in line with what we're doing, or what we thought we were aiming for?
That's a really good point, Chris. Yeah. I think I'd say that the strategy process is really important in terms of the leaders leading it. In terms of, like, to be fair, we're probably a smaller organisation, 200 people, but you've still got your executive leadership team, have to get together and say, hey, here's a bit of a framework to work with towards. And then the leaders should be working with their senior managers and their teams wider within that framework. And then I think of things as like quite an iterative process. So if you allow a decent chunk of time to roll through that process so that your team can be brought on the journey, I think that's critical. In terms of, then if there's a nugget of a new idea or whatever, then that can be explored and then go after it. We're lucky because of our size, we can then pivot quite easily. And particularly if there's great communication, people are aware of what's happening, and people are talking to each other, that's fantastic. And then pivot on if there's an opportunity to get a hold of. Like we always say, when we had in our goal sheet process, there'd be like, okay, part of it was your operational day-to-day. One section was the projects that you're doing this year. Another section was what other ideas are we coming up with that we might do next year. And I'd always say to my teams, if there's a good idea there, we're going to find a way to try and get it done this year if we can. If it's got a way to impact the numbers and add value to the business, why would we have a crack at it? And then you just got to prioritise, obviously, off the back of that.
Yeah, cool. It's about designing in those moments whereby ideas can come in, because obviously, if your target's set and I guess your instruction to the teams is too narrow, then that kind of looking sideways for other opportunities probably won't happen as much, because everyone's just going to be focused on the number or the one thing that's been put in front of them. And you see that happen too, right? In very sales-driven organizations, and worked with Salesforce and various other ones. That's it. That's what everyone's focused on. So you've got to design a bit of wiggle room into the system, it feels like, for people to be able to innovate and feel like they're comfortable in doing that too.
Yeah, and I think we're talking about budgeting processes and setting it up. You've got to find that way you've got to have a little bit of top down, but you've got to have a lot of bottom up. Because if you don't have bottom up detail where my team's working really closely with the commercial teams and the other teams around components of that budget, we may as well go and sit in the smoke-filled room and do the top-down stuff. So I think, but you've got to have it is the challenge of budgeting, where when you do your detailed bottom-up work, it'll always come in short. The guys will always be like, hey, when they're thinking about risk, the risk comes through in spades and there's no upside. And you go, well, hang on. Once you pull it apart, you got to do that. But then so you got to have a little bit of top down magic, but that's purely should be for setting the framework and saying, hey, look, we're this, but then facts and data. Everything's got to be facts and data. Because if your guys are doing the bottom up, have got really good facts and data, and they're bringing insights back, then you've got to listen to that in terms of what you're seeing. And conversely, from the top-down stuff, you've got to have facts and data to back you up. What do you think you're going to get that? What's the system growth telling you? So, what's inflation telling you? What's the economy telling you? What's going to happen over the next sort of 12, 16, 18 months?
Yeah. I think risk is a really interesting area from this point of view. What's your appetite and how do you handle it, and how do you get comfortable with it? Because superannuation or like any kind of financial product where you can diversify and you can have high risk and low risk things, but have you got a kind of way of running that kind of keeps you as chilled as you are, keeps you comfy?
Well, I think for us, being a growth business, it's about cash. Everything comes back to cash. And so it just comes back to cash, and then whether or not I actually believe we can do it. Because if we set a really high revenue target for the teams and they can't hit it, because we generally have reinvested most of our spare cash over the years at Canstar, like that. If we're not hitting our targets or with a career of them, that can create a real issue, knock-on effect in terms of we're running out of cash. And so for me, the risk of every budget forecast that we do is what's the cash flow implication of what we're doing, and then making sure we've got some frameworks, rules of thumb that we operate to make sure that we're not outside of those. And then you got to know your teams. Again, this is where it comes back to being a sort of small or medium-sized, smaller business. You've just got to know your people. Like, actually, a cracker on this, I got first taught this was at the ad agency. And my boss at the time, Damien, he would go with the client service directors back at the time. And he would know who was on and who was off in terms of who was going and who wasn't, purely from body language, talking to him, asking the right questions or whatever. And he taught me a lot about how do you know if that exactly, because back in the ad agency days, like you put up forecasts, you've got to go and win that work off the client, right? If you're doing tactical campaign sort of stuff. And so then it's about how in depth can you guys talk about the clients that they're talking to, and how do you know, what can you see coming through in terms of some of the campaign work that's going on? What's been happening with pitches? What's the global look of that client? Like, so for us here now, I don't think any of that changes. Like, for me, it's like whoever's in charge of the revenue line you want to know how they're going with client relationships are critical. Like we're just relationship focused at Canstar
Yeah.
because we've been bootstrapped. We've been self-funded the
Mm.
whole way through. And so relationships are critical, whether they're client relationships, partner relationships, even down to our relationships with our lawyers and bankers and accountants. They're critical for us because that all comes back to me for cash risk in terms of what we can do. And then that's why you get really good with your incentives is because those incentives have to drive incremental cash. And so when I'm thinking about incentives, I want to recognize the team. I've got to pay, make sure we look after the team.
Yeah.
Always got to make sure there's a few bucks to go into the kitty for the business as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So any kind of on incentives, is there anything that you think works better than other things, or do any things that you don't think work?
Things that you can measure, like whether it can be, because sometimes if it's a project, it's really hard, but it's got to be what's the deadline going to be in terms of exceeding those expectations or meeting those expectations, always allowing a little bit of slippage time in terms of the delivery dates, but then that's critical. But then what's that MVP look like? What's your minimum viable product look like? And what are we saying up front you're going to deliver at that time frame, I think, and then having regular check-ins for that progress on those.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a lot of chat, obviously, around because I'm doing quite a lot of organisational design, cultural design, designing for the experience of work, and you're thinking about how to differentiate yourself as a place of work compared to a lot of other places. And obviously, incentivization comes into that. There's some people that would be very happy with non-financial incentives. Put it that way. There are companies out there bending backwards to try and come up with like new cultural initiatives that are just going to stand out and feel a bit cool, like you were saying at the time with the bar behind the reception or whatever it is. It doesn't have to be that. There are lots of, I guess there's a more lateral kind of approach to making people feel good about the place that work, which presumably ties into a lot of what you're doing there at Canstar too.
Yeah, that's right. So we made just on that, and the bar thing's different now. Like that's I think for my team what works is Korean chicken and ice creams, and you go, hey, that's where the world's changed. That's fine, that's great, but so we made a real cultural shift probably around 2018, 2019 to really go after the sort of great place to work awards and to really go, what does it mean from a cultural perspective? And that culminated, we went on a award back in 21, but then just that post-COVID world and working from home, you've got to, if you want to get your teams in the office at least a couple of days a week, 2 or 3 days a week, you've got to do that. So like we are at Canstar, you can get your breakfast, you can make, even now you can make a sandwich at lunchtime if you want to. Like you can do breakfast and lunch, but in these times of sort of cost of living pressures, what we're basically saying is, look, if you can pay the public transport to come in, you can make your lunch at Canstar every day you want. And then, so we're doing that once a month. We're doing like a lunch on a Wednesday because that's currently where Tuesdays and Thursdays expected in the office. You can come any day you want, but to help incentivize people to come in on a Wednesday, I think the next lunch is Italian. We just did Greek the other day. Still by far the most popular was that they kicked off with KFC. It was amazing. Never seen so many people in the office with a KFC.
Is that right?
Oh, it's great. But I think you've really got to think, and in all the mat leave, paternity policies, things like that, the whole, it's changed over the last since COVID, and people have a choice. That's the other thing. The unemployment rate's still under 4%. So staff have a choice, and so you've really got to put effort into how you want to do it. And I'd say the staff lunch thing, where it's just a fully stocked fridge so you can basically make a ham and salad sandwich plus condiments if you want to. It's been really well received so far. Like it's been great. So I think that's whatever you can do to help your staff out. And I think too, acknowledge that Mondays, do you really need the guys in the office? Mondays are hard to get. And I think about working parents with kids and whatnot.
Yeah.
And so from a Canstar perspective, that's our exec meeting day. So at 10:30, the execs, we're in a locked room. They don't let us out for a few hours. But for us, that means the teams are preparing all their weekly reporting for that meeting. And so why would you make them come in? You're far better off. Let them get the kids off to school, whatever. They can sit down with a cup of tea or a coffee and then crack on with exec reporting and then do a fantastic job without having the stress of coming in the office. So I think this whole hybrid working from home thing can really work. But then I'm a big believer in having them get people in as much as you can, because you lose that water cooler chat and things like that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you've been able to set up different, I guess, sounds like rituals or routines around it.
Yep.
Have you had to enforce anything in that space?
No, like you might actually. It depends on their role a little bit, and then in terms of that. But I don't know, like the kind of person that I am, I need to be around my team, my people, and I would be, if I had someone like that in my team, I'd just be trying to get to the bottom of how it is. But then some teams, like tech in particular, sometimes those boys and girls would far rather just be at home in a dark room and just tap it away with their code. So then and I think that's where the incentives are even more critical about acknowledging that and letting them work from home a few days a week, a couple of days a week. But then what are we doing in terms of their professional development, in terms of from a coding perspective or product, what can we do to put on in the office to help them? I think the tech team, they did for a team quarterly event the other day, and we do that at Canstar, team quarterly events. Every exec's encouraged to do that.
Yeah.
The guys did a Lego Masters team body thing. And you go, that's great. So a guy who's a Lego master, and they did a team thing like that. So just trying to find new ways. It's just, it's very different to back when we were in London 20 years ago and there was a bar behind reception. I think that was the old way of the agencies keeping costs down. I think they just said, we'll just give everyone a few beers.
Yeah, 50p a bottle.
That's right.
I seem to remember. Or nothing on certain
That's
nights.
Right.
But yeah, that kept them there.
That's right.
I mean, a lot has changed. Obviously, we've talked about a few of the things already, but in terms of what are you seeing elsewhere in terms of the organisation, what's coming up, the market, what are you feeling like some of the trends are that you're feeling like you need to adapt to, and how are you managing that through the teams in a way?
Yeah, I think the big one is just automation and AI, and that's a real hearts and mind things, because a lot of people, as soon as you say that, will think that, hey, they're just going to chop costs, save costs. And it couldn't be, if you were talking about a big four bank, I could go like that. But like when you're in a smaller growth business, for us, it's about, we're always trying to punch above our weight against other competitors, even other institutions. And so for us, it's more about being able to be more competitive and more productive so that we can meet those challenges head on. And so I think that's a big one. And so then your people, like just talking to your people and trying to explain to them why it's important, what we've got to do it, and why and give them, say, hey, your jobs, this is not about firing anyone. This is about how can we do this. And so that's not a conversation you can just do once. Like that is a conversation you have to continually reinforce and whatever, and put your arms around your people and say, hey, we have to do this. But guess what? We're going to try and strip out of your day job a whole bunch of manual processes. That's the thing that I continually get amazed at around everywhere. Like whether it's within Canstar or other places, when I talk to other people, where you go, when you lift up a rock somewhere and you go, wow, someone's been put up with such a manual process to do something. And it's about, I think there's an interesting thing around, and this is where I think AI and automation is going to go steamroll companies, because the companies that will embrace it and get on board with it will just accelerate so quickly. And so I think internally it's about, how do you create that sort of trust environment where people can put their hand up and go, hey, I'm dealing with a really hard manual process over here. Can someone help me out with it? And sometimes you've got to go across teams to find someone who's got the skill set to be able to do that. We're lucky at Canstar. We have a lot of data that we collect. We process a lot of data with our staff, with all the star ratings and things, the algorithms around that. Like we're really lucky. We've got fantastic data engineers, mathematicians, the kids are coming through today at data science. They're just amazing what they can do. Yeah. But you'll have someone in another team that is not part of that doesn't see that on a day-to-day basis. They've got no idea that we've got this capability internally, even though we are the size that we are, and you go, wow. That's what I'm particularly amazed at. Like some of the stuff that came out in the innovation last week, I'm like, wow. There's some wow
Yeah,
moments.
yeah.
You go, wow, and you go, okay, we got to help these people. Then we got to, because you fix that person so much more efficient, and then they can actually add value on a whole bunch more stuff. But then they feel better about themselves. Can you imagine, like coming up, change over a process, and you look at 50 or 100 spreadsheets to do it, and you go, wow. So I think it's a massive opportunity. It's a massive hearts and minds because it's massive transformation as well. So
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot. I think it's obviously there are a lot to do with trust within your culture and within the leadership and the team dynamics that you have. If you're basically asking somebody to volunteer information about the things that they could make more efficient in the way that they work, that can be a hard conversation.
Yeah,
Because like the 2,200 spreadsheets or whatever it is,
yeah,
it's like people take pride in that. That's the way they've been doing it.
yeah,
That's how they've justified their timesheet.
yeah.
Because they've been running it with that level of care, even if to anyone else it sounds like a very arduous task. So just to those
Fantastic
people,
opportunity.
yeah, exactly. And then, like, how do you frame up the thing that they can do with the time they get back? Because I feel like there's a lot of conversations around the premise of AI and the fact that you're going to get 3 days of the week back or whatever.
Yeah,
That's just an exaggeration. But how are you turning that into something real for the people that you feel
yeah,
AI is helping?
yeah,
And how are you celebrating some of those stories within the business?
yeah. I think I'll use my own team to start off with.
Mm.
So we put in a new accounting platform last year. We've only been live on it 8 or 9 months.
Yeah.
We've just recently completely re-engineered board reporting, the weekly exec reporting, and there's no way we could have done that on the old system we ever had. And so for us, I actually feel like we're just at the start of a new journey in terms of how do we help the business provide more data with a digital business too. We've got so much data. Our biggest challenge is, again, being a growth business and not having massive teams. It's what are you focusing on today? So you're always cherry picking what you can and can't do. And so from an automation AI perspective, I get super excited. To say an example, you guys get sick of me talking about it again. Imagine an AI dashboard. I'm feeding all the data in from our websites, and it's just telling me, hey, Chris, like that your traffic or your is down 30% year on year for New South Wales refinances for the same day from same last year compared to last year. And I haven't done it. It's that whole reverse engineering. You don't have to boil the ocean anymore looking for insight. AI can give you that insight. And then as a finance professional, or I look after digital analytics at Canstar, so we have that you can just help the business out so much more quickly. And then say from a content perspective, our guys, oh man, takes such a long time to upload the content. You just go, great, we can write more articles. We can write, and the guys would say we can write more in-depth articles, which goes to your eat on Google, and it goes to this. And so for us, it's just about being able to do more, but not feel like, oh my God, like it's not a sweatshop more like it was back in the 80s, back over there. But it's that actually, it's more like you can actually, it's sustainable. And the guys are doing quality work. And so then they're happy to do that, because you're not going, it's not about just trying to get the data or the insight in or get that article up. It's about actually or coming up with the insight. So I get excited about it because I think it could really help people. And I think one of the big things I'm learning from it as we go on the journey as a business is actually the AI piece is just a little bit at the end. What it's actually forcing people to do is go and look at their infrastructure, how things are set up. There's usually quite a bit that's got to be unpacked around your processes, what you're sitting on in terms of infrastructure, whether it's tech or even process that you need to fix first. And that's where you need to leverage other teams and people with different skill sets to actually help you to do that. Like some teams that just don't have that skill set to help them. You need to bring in other skill sets to do it.
Yeah. It's definitely an enabler, I think, what you're describing there in the way of, it's like unleashing the possibilities a little bit and making that the currency. Like you basically got to get people started with it and to get the stories coming out for what it's been able to achieve before people believe that it can do anything more and that life at work can be any different, which it can, obviously. But if you're in a business like yours where it's 200 people and you're saying you can pivot quite easily, you can move towards a new opportunity. Like in that situation, it would feel really exciting if you had all the tools available to be able to just jump ship and work on something else for a few weeks one day and just see how far AI could get you within 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 24 hours, doesn't matter. But like you'd soon find out how it's taking a creator's mindset really into what would have typically been quite a process driven, arduous set of decisions. And decisioning particularly, you don't see it probably where you are so much, but with some of the government clients that we work with and within other financial services institutions, like it slows everything right down. And there obviously is a reason for that too, but it gets in the way of rapid innovation if you do want to move at speed. Competitive advantage is getting more and more important, isn't it? Because somebody else can just turn up and if a startup could spend 3 days doing what you had to do in 3 months or even longer, then it's worrying really that a couple of guys in a room could probably churn out something that a team of 40 or 50 were doing potentially if they were focused on that one thing. The whole kind of small, medium, large size enterprise and what each of those can do, it depends on the extent to which you're set up for some of this. And if you're not, then you're up against different people.
I think there's there's actually a real leadership challenge in terms of, because we've got a couple of interesting betas at the moment where we're leveraging AI in terms of what we might do on the website. And obviously from a Canstar perspective, we've got a financial services license, so there's a whole bunch of compliance stuff around that, so we're taking our time with it. But for us to even have got to where we were, you have to have like a growth innovation mindset, and you have to create the headspace for those people who are going to work on that to do that. And then that's also too where you leverage your partners, leveraging Google, Amazon, Azure, or whoever it is that you're partnering with. When those tools are becoming a play and being seen as creative can be quite helpful in terms of some of that acceleration in terms of that. But I think a lot of it comes down to your leadership in terms of what are people prepared to do to try and manufacture some of that time to do that, and then prioritization, because I think people have got time, but it's hard about how you're working on the right stuff. How do you empower your teams? How do you create that environment so everyone knows the journey you're going on to try and
how do you balance that? There's a lot, and we've had a lot of chats on the podcast around this already, but it's around change and how to plan for change or just let change happen. If there's too much change, it's just too much chaos, basically. Nobody knows what's going on. If there's too much direction, it feels too fixed. There's short-termism, there's longer-term strategy. Have you found any kind of mixes of that you feel are working better?
I think you've just got to bite off chunks, and I think you do have to be mindful of your teams a little bit. I think everyone's run at a certain pace to an annual budget, hit their targets, deliver the projects that are aligned with that strategy and budget process. And so you got to be a little bit careful about the change. And then the communications, it's pretty critical in terms of taking people on a journey. And you can't just front up as a leader and say something once and go, totally. Like, I can tell you last year, like when we were putting in an accounting platform, it's hard for everyone. And they're doing it on top of their day jobs. It's like we had a support from an implementation partner, but when it comes to UAT and everything's on our hook. And so then you've actually really got to, I tried to gamify it with the team and just create an aura of, hey, this can be fun. We were giving out prizes to people that we could see that were really engaging with it and really delivering on the UAT side of it. And then we try to you could make your team accountable in terms of, guys, when we go live on this, if you can't do your day job, we're going to be a spot of bother. So it's like knowing this, you're trying to, and then you're running a pitch with the team. So this is going to be great from a CV building, and it is, in terms of be able to say you've been on a project like that. It's amazing, like and the satisfaction you get at the end of it. Like we hit the deadline that we set out to do. Was it perfect? No. Were all our asses on fire? Yes. But did we have a big team celebration at the end? You bet we did, because the guys had delivered, and we're seeing the fruits of that now. 9 months
Yeah.
later. And I think that's hard for you guys when they're in the trenches all day. I think as leaders, it's about trying to paint a picture of, hey, this is what it could look like in time. And you've just got to try and, we'll always talk about staircases. Okay, if you know where you're going to go, that's great. But we can't go from here to there straight away. What's the staircase? And how can you get quick wins? Like, how can you just make a little win on that staircase? Everyone feels good about it. You can celebrate it. We love celebrating wins at Canstar. And then you're on the journey. And so I think that's the thing. You're celebrating innovation. Like we do a quarterly catch up with our senior managers and whatnot. And what we are continually amazed at, and the guys, they come and present what's been their wins, what's been their challenges, and what's their opportunities for the last quarter, and the opportunities of what's coming up next quarter. And we're always amazed at the micro innovation that goes on. Now, you wouldn't hear about that, except the guys have got to fill out the slides once a quarter and come and talk to the exec team. But it's really good. It's really engaging for the business. And you see that, and then you can join dots in different conversations. Hey, you need to go and talk to so, and that's great. And then you just be celebrating that with the team, and then you're going, okay, great. What's next? You know?
Yeah, it's cool. I mean, just hearing you talk, there's so many sideways conversations, and it's almost like the connective glue. Commercial side of things is obviously holding a lot of that together. You'll be exposed to so many of those chats, and the fact that you see it all and you can connect people, it feels like everyone knows that you're influential within the organization, but you're centrally placed for that visibility, which I think a lot of people may overlook. They might just go straight to whoever it is, the innovation lead or the experience lead or the product lead or the CEO. No, but actually, I think from what you're describing, you're having to bring a lot of those threads together for the innovation to be made possible.
Yeah.
So knowing who within your organization, doesn't have to be the finance lead either, but knowing who within the organization is basically facilitating that and is across some of those conversations is really important for you as a leader or an entrepreneur in one way or another, to be able to think about, okay, where do I sit? What's possible? How do we prove something? How do we make something different? How do we change it up? You've got to align to the right people, basically, from what I'm hearing.
No, but that's a really good point, because I think what you can, even in a bigger organization, right, someone will be a budget holder somewhere.
Yeah.
And someone will be preparing the reporting around that budget. And so if it's a bigger organization, you find out who's doing the financial, you'll probably know, so it'll be coming around reports from someone. You can build a relationship with that person. So if you're doing an innovation program design and you need to unlock, if you can build relationships with the people preparing the numbers, the people who have got responsibility for the numbers, and you can build sort of relationship pools around that, ponds around that. Then when you need, okay, we've got this cracking idea that's come up from over here. We need $5,000 or we need $10,000 to go and test it. And if you've built relationships and people are buying into your story or what you're saying, people will back you. I think they should. I'm a big believer in the finance unit and everyone that comes along with it. It should just be, we're there to support the business and we're there to help. And we want to drive and grow. And so it's about how can you help with that when you're talking on a growth and innovation perspective.
Yeah. And I think that's a big thing. You were saying it earlier with relations, Damien. It's how to bring that relational side to financial discussions. And we were taught it when we were first invoicing as well to clients, but you can't just position it as a number. Like you've got to embed it within a broader conversation. You've got to position its value and think about its value differently, and from the point of view of whoever it is you're communicating with. You can't just treat it as a cold hard number, because that only gets you so far. It probably shuts the conversation down a lot sooner than it would do otherwise. And particularly if you're getting into negotiations and other things, like the more relational it can be, the more easy it can be as well. It feels like for people, you're effectively running, it's not Shark Tank or Dragon's Den or anything, but you're managing the money. So somebody's going to have to convince you that money is better spent somewhere else. And you could have thought it's a bit like a council deciding whether they're going to spend money on a digital transformation or a website or a mobile app, or by putting more park benches in. So these are the discussions that you're going to have within your business. in any business, people are going to have to trade off this investment in your pay rise or this bit of kit or this test and market against other things. So I think that broader picture and awareness, like you've got to be able to get to that. Otherwise you don't know what kind of commercial discussion you're entering into fully.
Yeah.
So it's not like everyone really knows that, it feels.
Yeah. I think, but that's, again, the Canstar example was because we're in so many categories, we've always been in a trade off. If you're bootstrapped, self funded, but you operate in sort of 35 finance categories and Canstar bleeders over 300, we've just been kids in a candy shop the whole time. And so we've had to be really picky and choosy about where we choose to play because we've got some fantastic total addressable markets in a whole bunch of different places, but we're capital light, capital constrained, but the cash that we have. So it's a tricky one. And then that sort of cascades down. But then coming back to your point, I think the power of that relationship's right. Like when you're in project teams and you've got your finance contacts and you can just build those, it can just be so helpful because you never know where that's going to reverberate up in terms of you get some more visibility for the project that you're on and help. And if I think too, from a finance trying to influence, it's like using facts and data. Hey, look, if we had this $5,000, had this $10,000, we think we could impact this, which could lead to that, which could change this number by Y. Yeah, we don't really know if it's going to pan out that way, but that's a strong hypothesis, and we've got this data to back it up. People love that stuff because you're just putting science behind the spend and the data and what you want to do. And I think as automation, AI, all that stuff, everything is just data.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's like a sales job, isn't it, internally? But not everyone likes that. They don't like. Not everyone wants to be associated with sales, but that's effectively what you're having to position your output against somebody else is saying exactly the same thing, and you're up against that. So if you're the buyer, you're the finance lead. Which are you going to buy? It's interesting to think about it in terms of a competitive landscape with other people that you're working with as well. Yeah. Cool. Covered a lot of ground. Thank you for your time. And there's a lot in there that I'll think about. The KFC obviously stands out. No, I think there's a lot of good stuff in there. Just from the point of relational work, managing commercial strategy, preparing for change and enabling teams around change. There's a lot in that. And we've covered some good stuff and some great stories along the way. And obviously we know a lot of the same people and so can relate to some of these people we work with as well. So really appreciate the chat, Chris, and thanks so much for coming onto the show.
No, thank you. Really appreciate it, Chris. Cheers, mate.